and the moderator of the session, Mr. Kumar Vikram. Before we begin, as a tradition of National Book Trust India, we would like to honor our guest, that is Mr. Lauren Golson. So I call upon Mr. Amit Kumarji to kindly do the honor.
Good evening. This is a very interesting session, and especially since we are also launching a book that has been brought out on the occasion of India's guest country. It was written and illustrated by one of the most eminent children literature artists, Sri Sudha Sattva Basu. So first we will go for the launch. Professor Govind Prasad Sharma, Chairman, will be launching the title with other panelists, and then we can have a discussion. And so I would request our chairperson to kindly do the honors.
Yes, sir, please. Yes, ready. 1, 2, 3. One more, sir, please. Thank you, sir.
Where's my... Okay, thank you. Congratulations, Sudha Sattva Basu.
Thank you.
No? This book is started with a very simple query. When we were contacting the authors for this delegation, I was just, requesting them that if they have any of their books published in French, or they have some connection with any French publisher, they should mention it in their profile. So Sudha said that I have no such connections. The only connection which I have is that I belong to Chandranagar, and in that very conversation we decided that if that is the case, then he should do this book, and he should not only write it, illustrate it, and publish this. And it is a matter of great satisfaction, I'm sure, to you and to us as publisher and editor, that finally this book is before the audience right here in Paris. So I would like to start off with Mr. Basu. naturally, of course, we would request you to share your experiences of making this book, but in general, also the connections that you have, Chandanagar, and the French connections it has. Would you like to enlighten us about that?
It's a great moment. Thank you, Vikram. It all started with you. My connection, actually, I was born 6 years after Chandanagar became the part of Indian Republic of India. So I've seen that French Chandanagar never experienced that. But what happened, we were very conscious that Chandanagar has an ambience and infrastructure which is certainly very different from the neighboring towns. And we were very proud of it. And a lot of people from outside Chandanagar, they always eager to settle down there in Chandanagar. So I think when I was a child, I never realized that. But later on, when I look back, I see that is certainly something of French influence, French legacy, which made Chandanagar important place. Now, these main infrastructures were built by French people, and these hospitals, the libraries, my school, everything, colleges. It's a small town, but it had everything. So we enjoyed those facilities without knowing that those are actually happened much before we were born. And gradually, as I went to College of Art and started studying fine art, we also were discussing, studying architectures. Then I realized that there are Chandanagar many private properties as well as public structures. It has a very distinct French Rococo influence. Now at this age, when I'm studying those architecture, many of them are in a bad shape, but anyway, I found that the ornamentation, the decoration part of it is certainly French, though it was maybe executed by the local artisans. That is a different issue. Like there's one picture here, you'll find there's a pavilion next to Ganga, and it has 4 elephant heads jutting out. Now, ask any Indian artisan to create an elephant head, it will be an Indian elephant head. But interestingly, those 4 elephant heads, those are African elephant heads. Those are alien to Indian artisans. So certainly it cannot be the creation of the Indian artist or artisan. It was an African influence through French came to us and local artisans executed. Similarly, our bakeries had a lot of French breads. In our childhood days, we used to enjoy those. The kind of baguettes. And this French baguette took a very interesting form in Chandanagar with a local influence. And we had the boat-shaped bread. And in the same category, the crocodile bread. That was very popular. And in fact, in marriage, there's a custom to send gifts to one party to another party. And this a basket of breads, different kind of breads, was absolutely must. And we have seen it, we have experienced it. So it's not my imagination, it is there, it was there. Nowadays, I can't say how much this kind of influence is still there, but at least in our childhood, we experienced all those things, and certainly in our schools, French was a compulsory subject, French language. So we all studied French in our school days, but though I have forgotten because out of practice, I don't remember much. But those were the French legacy I remember.
Yeah, when you go to London and you see the architecture there, when you go to London and you see the architecture there, you are reminded of some of the architecture which you find in Mumbai or in Kolkata. You are here in Paris. Of course, Chandanagar is not Mumbai or Kolkata, but any such resemblance in any part of the city you find from the architecture that you find in Chandanagar?
Well, I mean, this time I haven't much time to go around, but in my last visit, yes, I did. See, the basic, say for pillar, which these French pillars, which has a root to, I mean, most of the European countries, their architecture has a root in Greek. This Corinthian pillar, okay? It has a different modification happen. This same pillar you can find there. You know, there are, even those buildings were, built by the private parties, not the government. Private parties, the influence is so strong that you can see these ideal French pillars are there. And other ornamentation like cherub with the winged, Cupid. This grapevine. Grapevine is certainly not a Bengal thing, but it is a French influence because grapevine is a very important imagery or ornamentation in French culture. In that sense, this Greek and French connection is there, which came to Chandanagar through them only, because grape is not a common thing in Bengal at all. So all these elements are very much there. And only the material they used are local materials, like Bengal bricks, lime coating, lime plaster. Here, most of the buildings are done with the limestone. So there they didn't use any limestone or any stone, but those are done with Bengal bricks, which is the available material there.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Very interesting observations. I come to Mr. Anand Nilkantan. You have a keen interest in the colonial history, and not only of British, but in many of your work we find Portuguese and French some references. How do you respond to this the topic that we are discussing, the French legacy in India, and what are your takes and your perspectives in, say, the 21st century? We are not in that period, but now how it all looks like.
Thank you. I was just looking the illustration. It's so beautifully done. Illustration, fantastically produced book also. Congratulations, sir. French connection, Chandranagar. I don't know whether you have included that. I was just going through. One of the important aspects as far as Indian freedom struggle is concerned about Chandranagar is this was a secret residence of Maharshi Aurobindo, and he was Aurobindo Ghosh, when the city resident Motilal Roy had given him a secret residence there, where before moving to Pondicherry, he had he was about to be arrested. He had moved to Chandranagar at the mid of the night, where Motilal Roy had given him a residence, secret residence, where Aurobindo was living in. It's a small attic, if I'm right. He used to change the places in 3 or 4 secret places, in shops and other places. He was hiding from the British secret police. It is said that he got a divine message saying that the police is going to come, even at Chandranagar, even the French one of the great things about the French government of that time, more French colonies in India, enclaves in India like Chandranagar, Pondicherry, Karaikal, Mayuri or Mahi, these were the places where the Indian freedom fighters used to hide from the British secret police. So from Chandranagar, in the Ghat, on one night, 120 years ago, Aurobindo had fled to Pondicherry, and from there the Indian history itself changed, where he established the Aurobindo ashram. My memories about the French occupation is coming from my native state, where the Mayuri is there or Mahi is there. It's like an enclave of French in Kerala, where it's a small town, around 10 square kilometers, but it's very distinct from the British enclave of Talassery. Mahi had its own culture. Its own, one of the things which I remember, like when you were talking about the different architecture of Chandranagar, in Mayuri there is one of the oldest churches built by the French in 1726, built in the French style. And there is a promenade, just like they have tried to create a mini Paris there. It's not that big, around 1.5, 2 kilometers, jutting to the sea and the Mayuri River where it opens up. Now it is named as Tagore Park, but it used to be a park dedicated to the French Revolution. For the 100th centenary of French Revolution, this was built, the park was built, I think in 1899. That period. And also about, apart from the St. Teresa's Church, there is a bell tower which the French Marines had built. I think if I remember correctly, it's Berylli and Co., the Paris clockmakers who had made it in 1850s. A French tower was there, clock tower is there, which is still functioning even after 170 years. The clock is still functioning and is one of the prominent places. The French cuisine had influenced, and another thing about Malayalam literature is that two of the classics of Malayalam literature were Kendra Sahitya Academy winning books, were born there, which we all grew up reading it. That is Mayuri Puriyada Thirangalil, on the banks of river Mahe, Mayuri by Mugundan, and Devathinte Vigrithigal, that is The Mischief of Gods, which also became a National Award winning film. So these are all the French connections which the Malayalam literature, which had originated from there, from the French Malayali writer Mugundan, who also had written Delhi. He's one of the veteran writers of Malayalam, now in his 80s perhaps, who had created with the French culture, in French Indo culture had influenced. And we all as Malayalis had grown up reading all these books and were familiar with the French idea of liberty, the French idea of fraternity, which influenced the freedom struggle of India and also the culture. So it is something which is fabulous when we are talking about Paris. This was like when you are coming here, all these childhood memories also come to us. Regarding that, and I am sure Chandranagar also, I have not been to Chandranagar honestly, I have only read about it and seen documentaries about it, but through the illustration of this book, you have beautifully brought the culture of it around, and which is also nostalgic for me, because I have been through this Mayuri town, which is a French enclave in Kerala, which is surrounded by the native influence and also by the British influence, because the Talassery town is hardly 6-7 kilometers away from the French enclave. And you can see how much different these two towns are, where the French had made a mark, and which is very near to the Kerala Kannur town, which is having an entirely different architecture, style and other things. So in a 10 square kilometer or 15 square kilometer, you find three distinct architecture, culture, cuisine, everything. And that is how the world was connected through perhaps colonialism, through the history of freedom struggle and other things. And to bring it alive from another historic town like Chandranagar, it is a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was just wondering that in the particular part of Kerala where you have this French connection, and when these references come in the novels and the poetry, I know it might be a little more difficult for other Malayali readers who don't belong to that area to fully understand and appreciate the context and the references. Do you think so?
See, French culture is, Malayalis are very familiar because of the translation works. I don't think yeah, there is anyone who has not read from Victor Hugo's or Camus, translated to Malayalam. We all read it first, translated to Malayalam. Malayalam has a good translation, literary culture. So the words which a great writer like Mugundan had used, it added only to the value of it. The kind of terms, the French, Malayali terms which he used in that, the language itself is slightly different. It added to the exotic value of it, and it's a great book, whatever has come from there. So it actually added to it, and Kerala as such has been cosmopolitan from time immemorial. All kind of civilizations and cultures, from Jews to Syrians to Turks to Arabs to Chinese, there have been enclaves and colonies right from the before Christ period. There was a Roman temple in Muziris. There was a Greek temple, Roman temple, Greek temple, etc. in Muziris before Christ. The first church outside the Holy Lands were in Kerala. The first mosque during the time of Prophet was in Kerala, during when the Prophet was living there. So the kind of influences Kerala always had as a part of the spice, it was the heart of the spice trade, and that's what brought the Dutch, the Portuguese, the French, the English to India itself are the spices. So that cosmopolitan culture was always there, and that influence was always there. It is still there, and it only added to the value of the book and the literature.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. We are indeed privileged to have Mr. Laurent Goldstein. He's a photographer, designer, art director, and author living in Varanasi and Paris. He publishes and exhibits his photographs in art galleries all over the world in order to sustain the education of a group of children in Benares and support human rights organization. Lord's work is spontaneous and influenced by Henry Carter Bresson, Raghu Rai, Herbert List, and photographers from the 19th century such as Samuel Bone, Madhu Prasad, or Brajagopal Brahmachari. We have a fabulous combination in you to give insights to us on this French legacy in India. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. So my connection with India is very recent because I'm in India since about 22 years only. However, I'm staying in Varanasi, which is not really a French enclave, but I get a lot of influence. I see a lot of influence mostly in the modern times. For instance, when I came to India, there was not many things regarding the contemporary French culture. But nowadays you can find many French restaurants and French brands all over India. Otherwise, what I have to say is mostly the capital of Uttar Pradesh is Lucknow, where the best school is called La Martinière. So when I went there, I was wondering why there is a French school in Lucknow. And I found out that there was a French presence, of course, since the 17th century in India, and in places such as Lucknow, starting at the end of the 19th century, the French were helping the Indians to fight against the Britishers, mostly because France was the hereditary enemy of England. And therefore, after the Napoleonic Wars, they were mostly involved into those things. And La Martinière was almost destroyed at the time because they were sheltering all the freedom fighters. And it's called the Revolt of Sipite. And so this is a French influence that I'm very aware of being in Varanasi. Otherwise, when I travel, I went to Chandigarh. Chandigarh is a city built by Le Corbusier. But as I was telling you earlier, I don't find a very French influence there because it is the dream of Le Corbusier, which was connected to an architectural style at that time, which was worldwide, not mostly French. And otherwise, I do a few movies, and I found out that the Frères Lumière, the Lumière brothers, came to India to show their first films. They came to Mumbai at that time, and that influenced quite a lot the beginning of the industry of cinema in India. Along that, you were talking about Aurobindo, and Mother was French. Mira Asfara she was a French who came to Auroville at the time, and maybe she gave a French influence, that French freedom spirit, maybe from the revolution. I don't. So everything is connected between what you said, but otherwise, this is really what I can say. The French influence is more into the ideas than in the style. And I see the ideas in the spirit of the revolution, in the spirit of the freedom fighters, and of course in the Constitution of India, which was influenced by the French Constitution. So that's basically what I have to say regarding this. Because even when I met a lot of designers in India, such as Satya Paul, who worked quite a lot in France with Yves Saint Laurent at the time, but you can't see really much his influence, a French influence in his work, because he was mastering the saris, and even the colors were mostly, I see more an influence of India into the French fashion than the opposite nowadays. So this is what I see.
Yeah, in the previous session, there were two references which came up, and I was quite curious to know about it. One is, when these French elections are going on, there are around 5,000 electorates in India, in Pondicherry and around, who are also voting there. And then there is an author who came here, he's based in France. He has written a book on the Indian soldiers who fought in the First World War with the French army. So I was just wondering whether these references, do they come, are they taught to you as part of history in schools? Are you aware of them?
Yes, I was aware. When I was a student, it was a long time ago already, but we had a little knowledge about what the Indians, how the Indians contributed to the freedom of France, mostly on the First and Second World War, but also at the time of Louis XIV, when there was an Indian ambassador in Versailles. And there was always a connection between India and France. And we can go back to the antique times, because a few people are aware that during the Roman times, most of the people were wearing fabrics from India in Europe. And the trade route, what we call later the Silk Route, was already on during the antique times. And France being a Roman colony, of course, at the time, there must have been an Indian influence into our culture. So, but mostly, I mean, what happened during the two last wars, it's of course something very obvious that we learn nowadays. And there is an important monument on the north of France commemorating all those heroes who came to fight and to die here for our freedom. They were mostly Punjabis, actually.
Okay, thank you. I spring a surprise on the author. I didn't prepare you for this, but I really request you to find out one or two suitable passages to read from the book on the occasion of the launch of this. Yes. Yes, it is.
See, this is not a continuous text. Generally happens in a book. Each write-up is a separate one, and it has two parallel narrative. The way this book is planned, it has two parallel narratives. One is the straight text, which is talking about the history and providing all facts and figures. And there is this little protagonist who gives his own comment or own ideas or whatever he thinks about in a rhyme form, in a speech blurb. So there are, on the same visual, you have two approach text-wise. One is rhyme, another is straightway prose. Now, I am reading straightway from here. Well, the mighty river Ganga is deep and abundantly full, making it ideal for the big ships to sail in it throughout the year. With Chandanagar being strategically located, the French East India Company bought another 982 hectares of land there for 40,000 rupees in 1688. With permission of Emperor Aurangzeb, they built a French settlement there and started a business of exporting textiles, food grain, indigo, and other goods. Farash Danga, the French territory known so in local parlance, was famous for handloom textiles. For instance, Farash Danga dhoti was in great demand at that time. The records show that business worth 2.5 million pounds was done in the year 1730 alone. Now, what this boy says? This boy says, fill up the hull, heave up the anchor, come the high tide, she will go far. Squalls, typhoons, pirate ships, the voyage is greatly risky indeed. This is the picture. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Before we close the session, I'm a publishing editor, so I have this habit of sourcing, So I think your input as an Indian teacher here in France, in this connection that what we are discussing, what as you said, you get some connections in languages. Would you like to give some inputs? Thank you. Siddharth-ji.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, I also would like to show that this book actually come out this week. So it's for learning Hindi for French speakers. So I think there was a lack of, because most of the Hindi learning methods are through English. And I think that's the point I would like to make, that to my surprise, the French were much quicker in learning Hindi than other foreign language speakers. Initially, I did not understand, but when I learned French, I realized that there are a lot of things which are similar. So for example, you don't have to explain to a French that if a chair is feminine, you need to do the adjective and the verbs accordingly. The logic is clear in his head. And a French student also understands that I say vous to you and tu, aap or tum. He knows that the grammar is different. And so I was quite surprised that, I didn't expect it to be so easy for them to understand the logic. And one friend who teaches French in India, she told me that her best students were those who came from villages because they didn't speak English. They picked up French very quickly. But those who were from the city and Anglophone, they were always thinking French is like English. So they were going via English to learn French, and they were failing every time because English and French are very two different languages. So I think this link between languages is also very interesting when you see that how they can make you come closer to cultures and to civilizations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Really, it was very interesting. So we come to the end of the session. And yes, please.
If any French authors are there, I don't know, or if it is reported, just when we were talking, this idea came to my mind. Like Tarantino had done in Inglorious Bastards, he had given an alternate ending to the World War, where the revolutionaries are able to kill Hitler. Now, in French-English rivalry in India, this Duplex, I think is pronounced Duplex, correct? Duplex was the greatest rival of Robert Clive, who had set up the British Empire actually. So it hung in a balance in the war between Duplex and Robert Clive, and the 7-year war broke out, and the French government didn't support Duplex. The first war, Duplex had won. He had captured Madras also at that time. And then he lost it to Robert Clive, and Duplex died a broken man. If some author is there, like how we have been writing about in India, we have been writing about alternate history. My books are about alternate history and other things. If some French author is there, if you imagine Duplex had won the war instead of Robert Clive, and the 7-year war had not broken out, how the world history would have changed is an interesting proposition to think about. Whether the French Revolution would have happened after that, whether instead of British Empire, which was once upon a time where the empire didn't, when the sun doesn't set, whether it would have been a French empire instead of that, how the course of history of Europe and Asia would have changed. It's a great novel plot, which perhaps some French novelist can attempt, is what I would like to say in this event.
I think that's a very interesting note on which to end this session. I would again express my gratitude and thanks to all the panelists for being here and for being part of this engaging discussion. Thank you. We'll go for a group photograph and then we'll leave this stage. Thank you.